The sound of her own heartbeat was deafening. Elora Matthews stood frozen in the doorway of her Manhattan apartment, her keys still dangling from trembling fingers. The grocery bags she'd been carrying lay forgotten at her feet, oranges rolling across the hardwood floor like scattered marbles of her shattered world. What would you do if you walked in on the person you trusted most, destroying everything you believed in? Would you scream? Would you run? Or would you stand there, like Elora, watching your entire life crumble in slow motion? Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, where we share stories that touch the soul and remind us of life's most powerful lessons. If you're new here, I'm Mr. Roman, and today's story will take you on an emotional journey. That proves sometimes our greatest heartbreaks lead to our most beautiful beginnings. But before we continue, if stories about resilience, unexpected love, and personal triumph speak to your heart, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Marius hadn't heard her come in. Neither had the woman whose arms were wrapped around him, whose lips were pressed against his neck. In their bedroom, the same bedroom where Elora had whispered, "I love you," just this morning. The same bed where they'd planned their future, talked about children, promised forever. The woman's laugh, light and carefree, cut through Elora like shards of glass. It was the laugh of someone who didn't know or didn't care that she was destroying a marriage, a home, a heart. Marius's hands were in her hair, the wedding ring Elora had placed on his finger. 3 years ago, catching the afternoon light streaming through their window. Time seemed to stop. Elora's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts in seconds. The late nights at the office suddenly made sense. The cancelled dinner plans, the way he'd stopped looking at her the way he used to. All those little moments she'd dismissed, explained away, ignored. They all clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to complete. Marius, the word escaped her lips before she could stop it, barely a whisper. But it might as well have been a gunshot. He jerked away from the woman so fast he nearly fell off the bed. His face, God, she'd never forget that expression. Guilt mixed with panic, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The woman beside him scrambled for the sheet, her earlier confidence evaporating as she finally understood the gravity of the moment. "Elora, Marius started, but what could he possibly say? What words could undo what her eyes had already seen? She should have screamed, should have thrown something, should have done any of the dramatic things betrayed wives do in movies. Instead, Elora felt a strange calm wash over her, like the eye of a hurricane. Her body moved on autopilot, bending down to pick up her keys with steady hands that betrayed none of the chaos inside. "I'm leaving," she heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady. "Don't follow me." The woman, whose name Elora didn't know and didn't want to know, clutched the sheet tighter. "I didn't know you'd be home," she said, as if that somehow made it better. Elora looked at her then, really looked at her. Young, pretty, nervous, everything Elora had been when she'd first met Marius. The irony wasn't lost on her. Without another word, Elora turned and walked out, leaving behind 3 years of marriage, 5 years of love, and every dream she'd built with the man who'd promised to cherish her forever. But here's what Elora didn't know as she stumbled onto the streets of New York, tears finally breaking. Free, somewhere in this vast city, a man named Valerian Hawke was about to finish a board meeting. A man who'd been carrying her memory in his heart for 10 years. A man who'd loved her from afar, waiting for fate to bring them together. A billionaire CEO who would soon become her unexpected salvation, though neither of them knew it yet. Sometimes life has to break us completely before it can rebuild us into who we're meant to be. And Elora's breaking had only just begun. But first, she had to take that next step. She had to walk away. She had to choose herself. And that, dear viewers, is where our story truly begins. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, sealing Elora inside with her reflection. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, mascara streaking down her cheeks, hair disheveled from running her hands through it, eyes hollow with shock. She pressed the lobby button with a shaking finger, then pressed it again and again. as if the repetitive motion could somehow speed up time or reverse it entirely. Have you ever felt your whole world crumble in an instant? Not gradually, not with warning signs you could prepare for, but in one devastating moment that splits your life into before and after. The elevator descended, and with each floor, memories rose unbidden. Their first date at that little Italian restaurant, where Marius had been so nervous he'd knocked over his wine glass. Their wedding day when he'd cried as she walked down the aisle. Just last week when he'd brought her flowers, lilies, her favorite, for no reason at all. Or so she'd thought. The lobby was mercifully empty except for George, the doorman who'd watched them move in as newlyweds. His cheerful greeting died on his lips when he saw her face. "Mrs. Matthews, are you all right?" She couldn't speak. If she opened her mouth, she'd either scream or sob, and she couldn't do either here, not yet. She managed a tight shake of her head and pushed through the revolving doors into the chaos of Manhattan. The city hit her like a physical force. Horns blaring, people rushing past, the smell of street vendor pretzels mixing with exhaust fumes. Life going on as if her world hadn't just imploded. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Marius calling. She pulled it out and stared at his contact photo, the two of them laughing at their engagement party. With deliberate precision, she declined the call and turned off the phone entirely. A yellow cab pulled up to the curb, and she climbed in without conscious thought. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Where to? Where did you go when home was no longer home? When the person you trusted most had just ripped your heart out?" The answer came from somewhere deep inside, a primal need for safety and comfort. "Penn Station," she heard herself say. "I need to catch a train to Willow Creek." The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Through the rearview mirror, she caught him glancing at her tear-stained face with the practiced discretion of someone who'd driven many heartbroken passengers through this city. Meanwhile, 23 floors up, Marius Caldwell was experiencing his own kind of hell. The woman, Natasha, her name was Natasha, was dressing hurriedly, her earlier seductive confidence replaced by uncomfortable silence. "You said she worked late on Thursdays," Natasha accused, pulling on her shoes. "You said we had time." "She does work late. She always—" Marius ran his hands through his hair, pacing the bedroom like a caged animal. "God, what have I done?" Natasha paused in applying her lipstick, studying him in the mirror. "Don't act like this is all on me. You pursued me, remember? All those drinks after work, all those messages about how she didn't understand you anymore." The truth of her words hit him like a slap. He had pursued her. For months, he'd been playing with fire, telling himself it was harmless flirtation, that he deserved some excitement. Elora had been so focused on her architecture projects lately, working long hours, coming home exhausted. He'd felt neglected, invisible. Such pathetic excuses now. "You need to leave," he said quietly. Natasha grabbed her purse, her expression hardening. "You know what? You're right. This was a mistake. Good luck explaining this to your wife." She paused at the bedroom door. "Oh, wait. I don't think you'll get that chance." The apartment door slammed behind her, leaving Marius alone with the wreckage of his choices. He tried calling Elora again. Straight to voicemail. He texted frantically, "Please let me explain. It meant nothing. I love you. Come home so we can talk. I'm so sorry." Each message more desperate and futile than the last. At Penn Station, Elora bought a ticket with robotic efficiency. The next train to Willow Creek didn't leave for an hour. She found herself in the waiting area, surrounded by travelers heading home for the weekend, families reuniting, couples holding hands. The normalcy of it all felt like mockery. Her phone, turned back on briefly to check the train schedule, exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls from Marius, 32 text messages. She deleted them all without reading, then scrolled to her mother's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she couldn't. Not yet. If she heard her mother's voice, the dam would break completely. The train ride blurred past in a haze of autumn colors. The city gave way to suburbs, then countryside. With each mile between her and Manhattan, between her and Marius, she felt something inside her alternating between numbness and raw agony. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and closed her eyes. A memory surfaced, their honeymoon in Greece. They'd watched the sunset from their hotel balcony, and Marius had pulled her close, whispering promises in her ear. "I'll never hurt you," he'd said. "You're my everything." How long had he been lying? When did everything become not enough? The train conductor's voice announced Willow Creek Station, jolting her back to the present. She gathered her purse. She hadn't even brought a change of clothes, hadn't. At thought beyond the need to run, and stepped onto the familiar platform. The air here was different, cleaner, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The station looked exactly as it had when she'd left for college 12 years ago, down to the peeling green paint on the benches. But she was different. The girl who'd left Willow Creek with dreams of city lights and architectural wonders was gone, replaced by a woman with a broken heart and a wedding ring that suddenly felt like it was burning her finger. The taxi ride to her childhood home took 15 minutes through streets she could navigate blindfolded. Past the elementary school where she'd won her first art contest. Past the church where her parents had married 35 years ago and were still happily in love. The contrast to her own failed marriage was another twist of the knife. The farmhouse appeared through the trees, warm light spilling from the kitchen windows. Her mother's silhouette moved past the glass, probably preparing dinner with no idea her daughter's world had just collapsed. Elora paid the driver and stood at the end of the driveway, suddenly uncertain. What would she say? How could she explain that the man her parents had welcomed into their family, who'd carved a Thanksgiving turkey just last year, had betrayed them all? But she didn't have to figure it out. The front door opened, and Rhiannon Matthews stood there, somehow knowing, the way mothers always know, that her child needed her. "Elora?" Her mother's voice carried across the yard, concerned and questioning. That single word, her name spoken with such love and worry, finally broke the dam. Elora's knees buckled, and she sank onto the cold ground, sobs tearing from her throat with violent force. She was dimly aware of her mother running toward her, of strong arms pulling her up, of being half carried into the house. "My baby, my sweet girl, what happened?" Rhiannon's voice was fierce with protective love as she guided Elora to the kitchen, to the same chair, where she'd done homework and eaten countless meals and been comforted through every childhood crisis. Elora could barely get the words out between sobs. "I came home early and he was. There was another woman. In our bed, Mom. In our bed." Rhiannon's face went through a series of expressions, shock, disbelief, and finally, a rage so pure it could have melted steel. But she pushed it down, focusing on her daughter. "Oh, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She pulled Elora into her arms, rocking her like she had when she was small. "You're safe now. You're home. Let it out." And Elora did. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes burned, until she had no tears left. She cried for the future she'd lost, for the trust that was shattered, for the woman she'd been just hours ago who'd believed in forever. Outside, night fell over Willow Creek, wrapping the farmhouse in darkness. But inside, in her mother's kitchen, held in arms that had never let her. Down, Elora began the long journey of putting her pieces back together. Though she didn't know it yet, this wasn't the end of her story. It was a painful chapter, yes, but new pages were waiting to be written. And somewhere in Manhattan, a man named Valerian was about to make a decision that would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks passed in the sheltered calm of Willow Creek. 2 weeks of her mother's cooking, of walking through autumn fields, of crying herself to sleep in her childhood bedroom. But Elora knew she couldn't hide forever. Her life, what remained of it, waited in New York. Her job at the architecture firm. Her friends. Her apartment, though. She couldn't bear the thought of returning there. "Are you sure you're ready?" Rhiannon asked, watching her daughter pack the few clothes they'd bought at the local store. "You can stay longer. Your father and I love having you home." Elora zipped her small suitcase. "I have to face it sometime, Mom. I can't rebuild my life from my old bedroom." Rhiannon nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Where will you stay?" Callista offered her guest room. "She's already plotting a revenge makeover." Elora attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll be okay." The journey back to Manhattan felt different this time. The familiar skyline no longer represented hope and opportunity as it had when she'd first arrived fresh out of college. Now it was a landscape of memories she needed to reclaim, one street at a time. Callista Chen was waiting at her apartment door, arms crossed, determination blazing in her eyes. At the sight of her best friend, Elora's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. "Don't you dare apologize for showing up," Callista said before Elora could speak, pulling her into a fierce hug. "And don't you dare cry unless they're tears of, 'I'm going to live my best life now,' because that man doesn't deserve your tears." Inside, the apartment was warm and inviting. Callista, an interior designer, had transformed her guest room into a sanctuary, fresh, flowers, new bedding, and not a single reminder of Marius or their life together. "Jeremy's making dinner," Callista explained, referring to her husband of 5 years. "And before you ask, yes, I told him everything, and no, he's not allowed to hunt down Marius, though he wanted to." For the first time in weeks, Elora laughed. It was small and rusty, but genuine. That night, over homemade pasta and too much wine, Callista and Jeremy created a space where Elora could breathe. They didn't tiptoe around her pain or offer empty platitudes. Instead, they listened, cursed Marius creatively when appropriate, and promised her that life would eventually feel normal again. "You're not moving back to that apartment," Callista declared, refilling Elora's glass. "Jeremy's cousin is a lawyer. We'll get your things, handle the lease, deal with him. You focus on healing and work," Jeremy added gently. "Aren't you presenting that fountain design next week?" Elora nodded. Work, the one area of her life that still made sense. "Yes, on Wednesday." "Then that's your mission," Callista said firmly. "Knock them dead with your brilliant design, and let us handle the rest." The following days fell into a rhythm. Elora threw herself into work, perfecting her presentation. Evenings were spent with Callista and Jeremy, or alone in her room, slowly, piecing together a vision of what her life could be without Marius. She ignored his calls, which eventually stopped coming. Through Callista, she learned he'd moved out of their apartment, leaving behind most of their shared possessions. It felt like both a relief and a final acknowledgement that their life together was over. A week after her return, on a crisp November afternoon, Elora found herself walking home from the office alone. Snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes that melted against her coat. The temperature dropped suddenly, sending pedestrians scurrying for shelter. On impulse, she ducked into a small cafe on the corner of 8th Avenue, drawn by the golden light and the promise of warmth. The cafe was crowded with others seeking refuge from the weather. The rich aroma of coffee and cinnamon filled the air, along with the hum of conversation and soft jazz playing over hidden speakers. Elora joined the line, rubbing her cold hands together as she studied the menu board. "Chai latte, please," she told the barista, fishing in her purse for her wallet. "Extra cinnamon." "Make that too," a deep voice said from behind her. "And I'll get hers as well." Elora turned, startled. The man behind her smiled, a gentle expression that crinkled the corners of his hazel eyes. He was tall, with broad shoulders beneath an expensive wool coat. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that suggested he was in his late 30s. "That's not necessary," she said automatically. "I know," he replied, his voice warm and assured. "But sometimes a random act of kindness is exactly what a snowy day calls for." There was something about him, a quiet confidence that wasn't arrogance, an attentiveness. In the way he looked at her, that made Elora pause before refusing again. "Thank you," she said finally, stepping aside as he paid for both drinks. They collected their lattes and looked around the packed cafe. Not a single table was free. "Would you mind sharing?" he asked, nodding toward a small table in the corner where a woman was just gathering her things to leave. "I promise I'm not a cafe stalker." His smile was self-deprecating, disarming. Against her better judgment, or perhaps because of the persistent cold in her bones that wasn't entirely weather-related, Elora nodded. "Sure." They settled at the small table, warm mugs cradled between their hands. Through the window, the snow fell more heavily now, coating the city in white silence. "I'm Valerian," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Elora." She shook his hand briefly, noting how warm his palm was against her still cold fingers. Beautiful name. He took a sip of his drink, studying her over the rim. Not common. Is there a story behind it? Elora hesitated. Normal small talk felt foreign after weeks of emotional turmoil, but there was something in his genuine interest that made her want to respond. "My mother loves botanical names," she explained. "Elora is a type of flowering tree. My sister is named Lily." "Ah." He nodded appreciatively. "And do you live up to your name? Bloom where you're planted and all that?" The question hit unexpectedly close to home. Elora looked down at her latte, watching the cinnamon swirl in patterns across the foam. "I'm working on replanting at the moment." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "New beginnings can be challenging," he said softly, "but often necessary." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something Elora couldn't quite name. She studied him more carefully now. His clothes were clearly expensive but understated. No wedding ring. A sleek watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Yet nothing about him felt showy or pretentious. "And what do you do, Valerian?" she asked, surprising herself with her curiosity. He smiled. "I run a company, technology solutions primarily." "That's vague," she noted, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to vibrate through the air between them. "Fair enough. We develop software for architectural visualization, among other things, helping architects show clients what buildings will look like before they're built." "I'm an architect," Elora said, surprised by the coincidence. Valerian's eyes widened slightly. "No way. What firm?" "Maddox and Bell." "I'm working on the Riverside Park fountain renovation." Something flickered across his face. Recognition? But it was gone so quickly, Elora wondered if she'd imagined it. "I'd love to hear about it," he said, leaning forward with genuine interest. And somehow, in that crowded cafe with snow falling outside, Elora found herself talking about her work, her passion for sustainable design, the challenges of modernizing historical elements. Valerian listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood the technical aspects of her field. The conversation flowed easily, moving from architecture to art, from New York neighborhoods to childhood memories. Elora was shocked when she glanced at her watch and realized an hour had passed. "I should get going," she said reluctantly. "My friend will wonder where I am." "Of course." Valerian stood when she did, a gentlemanly gesture rarely seen in New York. "But before you go," he hesitated, then continued with quiet confidence. "I'm sponsoring a small art exhibit opening tomorrow evening. The artist is a friend of mine. Would you consider joining me? The work focuses on urban landscapes, which might interest you professionally." Elora felt a flutter of panic. Was this a date? Was she ready for that? Her hesitation must have shown on her face. "Just as friends," Valerian added quickly. "No pressure. Just good art and conversation." She should say no. It was too soon. She was still raw, still healing. But there was something about Valerian that felt safe, and the thought of another evening alone with her thoughts was suddenly unbearable. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. His smile was like sunrise. "Wonderful. Shall I pick you up at 7? They exchanged numbers, and Elora left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The snow continued to fall around her, but she barely noticed the cold. The next evening found Elora standing before Callista's full-length mirror, studying her reflection with critical eyes. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not trying too hard, paired with a borrowed crimson scarf that added a splash of color. "You look beautiful," Callista said, leaning against the doorframe. "And nervous. It's just an art gallery, not a marriage proposal." Elora laughed shakily. "I know. It's been a while since I've done anything like this." "You mean meet an attractive, successful man who isn't a cheating scumbag?" "Yes, it has been." Callista's bluntness was exactly what Elora needed. "Have fun. Look at pretty paintings. Drink free champagne. The rest is optional. At 7 precisely, the doorbell rang. Valerian stood in the hallway, somehow more handsome than Elora remembered. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, and he held a small bouquet of white ranunculus, simple, elegant, and notably not roses. "You look stunning," he said simply. The gallery was in Chelsea, housed in a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and soaring ceilings. Despite Valerian's modest description of a small exhibit, the space was crowded with well-dressed people sipping champagne and discussing the artwork in hushed appreciative tones. "The artist is Leon Mercer," Valerian explained as they entered. "He captures urban isolation in a way that feels both melancholy and hopeful." Elora studied the nearest painting, a rain-soaked New York street at dusk, pedestrians hurrying past each other, umbrellas creating barriers between them. Yet the artist had used light in a way that connected the isolated figures. Threads of gold binding strangers together without their knowledge. "It's beautiful," she murmured, lonely but not despairing. Valerian nodded, pleased by her observation. "Exactly. Leon believes we're all connected, even in our most isolated moments." They moved through the exhibit slowly, pausing before each painting. Valerian knew the stories behind many of them, sharing insights about the artist's technique and vision. Occasionally people approached him with respectful nods, confirming Elora's suspicion that his sponsorship of the event was more significant than he'd let on. Before a painting of a solitary woman sitting in a cafe window, Elora felt a strange resonance. The woman's face was turned away, looking out at the city, but her posture conveyed both loneliness and strength. "This one speaks to me," she admitted quietly. Valerian stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "It's called Threshold," he said. "Leon painted it during a difficult time in his life. He said it represented the moment between ending and beginning." Elora turned to look at him, struck by how perfectly those words described her current state. "That's exactly where I am right now," she confessed. "Standing on a threshold, not sure which way to step." His eyes held hers, warm and understanding. "Thresholds are sacred spaces. Take all the time you need." The simple permission to be exactly where she was, not rushed, not judged, touched something deep inside Elora. For weeks, she'd felt broken, damaged, less than. But in Valerian's gaze, she saw herself reflected as whole and valuable, threshold and all. Later, after champagne and conversations with the artist, they walked along the High Line. The elevated park was quiet in the winter evening, fairy lights twinkling among bare branches. Below them, the city pulsed with energy, but up here, time seemed suspended. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the Hudson River, the water black and glittering with reflected lights. The cold air brought color to Elora's cheeks as she turned to thank Valerian for the evening. But words failed as she found him looking at her with an expression of such tender admiration that her breath caught. He moved closer, slowly enough that she could have stepped away if she wanted to. She didn't. His hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek. "May I?" he whispered. Elora nodded, heart hammering in her chest. His lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a kiss that asked for nothing but offered everything. His hand cradled her face, as if she were precious, irreplaceable. The kiss deepened, and Elora felt something crack open inside her, not breaking, but thawing. When they finally pulled apart, she was trembling slightly, overwhelmed by emotions she'd thought buried under grief. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you in the cafe," Valerian admitted, his voice husky. "You looked so beautiful, even in your sadness." Elora's eyes widened. "How did you know I was sad?" He smiled gently. "I recognize the look of someone standing on a threshold. If you've ever wondered if love can find you when you least expect it, when you're at your most vulnerable, hit that like button. Because sometimes the universe has plans we can't begin to imagine, and the people who are meant to heal us appear exactly when we need them most." The weeks that followed their first kiss unfolded like pages from a story Elora never expected to read. December arrived, transforming Manhattan into a winter wonderland of holiday lights and bustling shoppers. For the first time since her world collapsed, Elora found herself looking forward to each new day. Valerian became a constant presence in her life, steady and reassuring. Their second date was a surprise visit to a hidden architectural bookstore in Brooklyn, where he'd arranged for her to meet the author of her favorite design theory book. Their third was an evening at the New York Philharmonic, where he confessed. He knew little about classical music, but loved watching her enjoy it. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" she asked him one evening as they strolled through Bryant Park's winter market, hot chocolate warming their hands. He smiled that gentle smile that made her heart skip. "I pay attention," he said simply. And he did. Valerian noticed everything: how she took her coffee, one sugar, splash of milk, which architects. She admired Zaha Hadid and Louis Kahn, how she touched her necklace when she was nervous. Small observations that accumulated into something that felt remarkably like being known. At Callista's apartment, Elora began packing away the remnants of her old life. With each item sorted and each decision made, she felt lighter. She'd agreed to meet with the divorce lawyer Jeremy had recommended, taking the first concrete steps toward legally ending her marriage. He called again. Callista mentioned casually one evening as they prepared dinner. "Marius wanted to know if you'd changed your number." Elora's hands stilled over the vegetables she was chopping. "What did you tell him?" "That he lost the right to know anything about your life when he decided to play house with his little side piece." Callista's protective anger was a balm to Elora's healing heart. "He said he misses you." "That's not my problem anymore," Elora replied, surprised by how little pain the statement caused. 6 weeks ago, those words would have been impossible to say. Christmas approached. Valerian invited her to his company's holiday gala, a black tie affair at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It would be their first public appearance as a couple, and Elora felt both excitement and trepidation as she prepared. "You're nervous," Callista observed, helping her with the clasp of a borrowed diamond necklace. "Don't be. That man looks at you like you hung the moon." "It's not him I'm worried about," Elora admitted. "It's everyone else. His colleagues, his friends. I'm still technically married, still dealing with my divorce. What if they think I'm—" "Stop." Callista turned her to face the mirror. "Look at yourself. You are strong, brilliant, and kind. Anyone who judges you doesn't deserve your time, and Valerian clearly doesn't care about any of that." The gala was more elegant than any event Elora had attended before. The museum's great hall had been transformed with thousands of twinkling lights and towering Christmas trees. Valerian never left her side, his hand a reassuring presence at the small of her back as he introduced her to colleagues and friends. "This is Elora Matthews, the brilliant architect I've been telling you about," he would say, pride evident in his voice. By midnight, as they swayed together on the dance floor, Elora realized something profound had shifted inside her. The hollow ache that had been her constant companion since that awful day was fading, replaced by something warm and hopeful. "Thank you," she whispered against Valerian's shoulder. "For what?" he asked, pulling back slightly to see her face. "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For being patient while I heal." His eyes softened. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had become familiar and dear. "Elora." He said her name like a prayer. "Healing isn't linear. Some days will still hurt, but I'll be here for all of them, if you'll let me." The week before New Year's, Valerian invited her to dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The candlelit table overlooked Central Park, the city spread out below them like a carpet of jewels. "I have something for you," he said, after they'd finished their meal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elora's heart jumped to her throat. "Valerian," he laughed softly at her expression. "It's not a ring, not yet. That would be presumptuous, given everything you're still processing." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a threshold, a doorway, simple and elegant. "To remind you that every ending makes room for a new beginning." Tears pricked at her eyes as he fastened it around her neck. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, cool against her skin. "It's perfect," she whispered. They left the restaurant hand in hand, deciding to walk a few blocks before hailing a cab. The night was clear and cold, the stars unusually visible above the city lights. They turned onto a quieter street, lost in conversation about their plans for the new year. "Elora, wait!" The voice sliced through the night like a knife. Elora froze, the sound triggering an immediate physical response, tension coiling through her body, her heart racing. She knew that voice, had heard it for 5 years, had loved it once. Marius stood on the sidewalk ahead of them, clearly drunk, his coat unbuttoned despite the cold. His face was haggard, his eyes desperate as they fixed on her. "Please," he said, stepping closer. "Just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Valerian's arm tightened protectively around Elora's waist. She felt his body shift slightly, positioning himself between her and Marius. "This isn't the time or place," Valerian said quietly, his voice firm but not aggressive. "The lady doesn't want to speak with you." Marius's bloodshot eyes narrowed as he took in Valerian, the expensive coat, the protective stance, the way Elora leaned into him. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Are you sleeping with my wife?" The crude accusation hung in the frigid air. Elora felt a flash of anger, hot and clarifying. "I'm not your wife anymore, Marius," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Not in any way that matters. So you just moved on? That quickly?" Marius's laugh was bitter. "What happened to for better or worse? What happened to the vows we took?" "You happened to them," Elora replied. "You broke them when you brought another woman into our bed." Marius flinched as if she'd slapped him. "It was a mistake. One mistake in 5 years, Elora. People forgive mistakes. Some mistakes can't be undone." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Please go home, Marius. You're drunk, and this conversation isn't helping either of us." He stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "Just listen to me." Valerian moved so smoothly it was almost imperceptible. One moment he was beside Elora, the next he stood directly between them, his hand gently but firmly pushing Marius's arm down. "The lady asked you to leave," Valerian said, his voice low and controlled. "I suggest you respect her wishes." Something in his tone, not threatening but utterly resolute, seemed to penetrate Marius's alcohol-fueled determination. He looked past Valerian to Elora, his expression crumpling. "I still love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I made one terrible mistake, and I've lost everything that matters." For a brief moment, Elora felt a flicker of the old pain. But it was distant now, like looking at a photograph of a place she'd once lived, but no longer called home. "I hope you find peace, Marius," she said gently. "But it won't be with me." She took Valerian's hand and led him away, not looking back at the broken figure on the sidewalk. They walked in silence for several blocks, the tension of the encounter gradually dissipating with each step. "Are you all right?" Valerian finally asked. Elora considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said, realizing it was true. "I'm sad for him, and for what we lost. But I'm not broken by it anymore." Valerian squeezed her hand, his eyes warm with understanding. "You're the strongest person I know." Elora Matthews. The following Sunday, Valerian invited her to his apartment for brunch. She'd never been to his home before, and as the elevator ascended to the penthouse level, she felt a flutter of anticipation. The doors opened directly into his living space, and Elora gasped softly. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the city beyond. The decor was minimalist but warm, comfortable leather furniture, bookshelves, filled with architecture volumes, and original artwork on the walls. It was the home of someone with means but also taste and substance. "This is beautiful," she said, moving to the windows to take in the view. Valerian watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Nervous, anticipatory. "I'm glad you like it." Coffee? Over freshly baked croissants and fruit, they talked easily about their week ahead. Valerian mentioned a business trip to Chicago. Elora shared news about a design competition her firm had entered. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in golden light. As they finished eating, Valerian's expression grew serious. "Elora, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you sooner." She set down her coffee cup, a flicker of apprehension tightening her chest. "That sounds ominous," He smiled reassuringly. It's not bad. At least, I hope you won't think so. But it is important. He took a deep breath. Our meeting at the cafe wasn't entirely by chance. Elora frowned slightly. What do you mean? Valerian stood, moving to a bookshelf where he retrieved a slim volume. He opened it to a marked page and handed it to her. It was a program from an art fair, dated 10 years earlier. Willow Creek Community Art Festival was emblazoned across the top. 10 years ago, I visited my aunt in Willow Creek, he began, his voice soft with memory. She insisted I attend this local art fair. I was bored, checking emails on my phone, until I looked up and saw the most captivating woman I'd ever laid eyes on. Elora stared at the program, memories surfacing. She'd volunteered at that fair, helping with the children's art workshop. You were helping a little girl with her painting, Valerian continued. She was frustrated because her trees didn't look right, and you knelt beside her, so patient and kind. You told her that art isn't about perfection, it's about expressing how we see the world. Elora looked up at him, stunned. You remember what I said? He nodded. Every word. I watched you that whole afternoon, too shy to introduce myself. You were like sunshine, warm and bright and life-giving. I asked someone your name before I left, but by then you were gone. He moved to sit beside her on the couch, his eyes never leaving hers. 2 years later, I was at a networking event in New York. A young architect gave a presentation on sustainable urban design that blew everyone away. It was you, Elora. Same smile, same passion, same light. The Grayson Foundation Conference, she whispered, remembering. That was my first major presentation. You were brilliant, he confirmed. I tried to reach you afterward, but you were surrounded by admirers. And then I saw your engagement ring, and the way you looked at the man beside you. Marius, Elora supplied. Yes. You looked so happy, so in love. I couldn't intrude on that. Elora's mind raced, piecing together the implications. So, all these years, I kept track of your career, he admitted. I'm not proud of it, but I would attend events where I knew you'd be speaking. I followed your projects. I even directed my company to develop software specifically for architectural visualization because I knew it was a field you were interested in. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking vulnerable. When I saw you in that cafe, looking so sad, so broken, I knew immediately what had happened. Your wedding ring was gone, and there was a grief in your eyes I recognized. How? She asked. Because I'd seen it in my own mirror years ago, he said quietly. After my fiancée left me for my business partner, Elora reached for his hand, understanding blooming. So you sat with me. I couldn't walk away again, he said simply. Not when you needed someone, not when fate had finally put us in the same place at the same time, with no barriers between us. Silence fell between them, heavy with revelation. Elora's emotions whirled, surprise, confusion, a hint of wariness, but underneath it all, a growing warmth. I understand if this changes things, Valerian said, watching her face carefully, if it seems strange or unsettling. I wanted to be honest with you before we go any further. Elora considered his words, his actions over the past months. He had never pushed, never rushed her healing. He had created space for her to rebuild herself, offering support without demand. Why tell me now? She asked. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. And love can't grow in shadows or half-truths. The naked honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. She thought of Marius, of the lies and betrayal that had shattered her trust. Here was a man offering the opposite, uncomfortable truth, even at the risk of losing her. I need some time, she said finally, to process this. Valerian nodded, acceptance in his eyes. Of course. Take all the time you need. The following week was one of deep reflection for Elora. She finalized her divorce paperwork, officially ending her marriage to Marius. The act felt less like closure and more like confirmation of a chapter already completed. She thought often of Valerian's revelation. At first it had seemed almost alarming, the idea that he had watched her from afar for years. But as she reflected on his actions, she recognized the profound respect he'd shown her. He had admired her from a distance, but never interfered. He had waited until she was free, until fate brought them together naturally. 7 days after his confession, Elora returned to Valerian's apartment. He opened the door, his expression hopeful but restrained. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about threshold." A small smile touched his lips. "Have you?" "Yes. About how you can stand in a doorway forever, afraid to step through, or you can trust that what waits on the other side is worth the risk." She moved closer to him, reaching up to touch his face. "I filed for divorce yesterday. It's done, that chapter of my life, and I've decided something else too." "What's that?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "That a man who waited 10 years for the chance to know me, who respected my marriage even as he carried me in his heart, who told me an uncomfortable truth rather than a comfortable lie, that's a man worth stepping toward, not away from." Valerian's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" Elora nodded, certainty filling her. "I'm not promising forever yet, but I am promising today and tomorrow and as many days as it takes for us to discover what this could become." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. "That's all I could ever ask for," he whispered against her hair. As the winter sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across Valerian's apartment, Elora felt something she had thought lost, forever. The quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to find. Spring arrived in New York, with a gentle persistence that mirrored Elora's own renewal. The bitter cold of winter gave way to tender green buds in Central Park, cherry blossoms, framing the reservoir, and a lightness that seemed to permeate the city air. As nature transformed around her, Elora found herself changing too, growing, strengthening, blooming. Her divorce was finalized in early March, a surprisingly anticlimactic event, marked only by a signature on documents and a brief meeting with her lawyer. The legal dissolution of her marriage felt like a formality. Emotionally, she had released that bond months ago. "How do you feel?" Callista asked that evening, pouring celebratory champagne in her kitchen. Elora considered the question carefully. "Free," she decided. "Not happy exactly. It's strange to celebrate the end of something I once believed would last forever. But unburdened." "To unburdening, then." Callista raised her glass. The next morning, Elora awoke to a text from Marius, the first direct communication she'd allowed in months. "I received the final papers. I know it's too late to fix what I broke, but could we talk? One last conversation for closure. I owe you that much." Her initial instinct was to refuse. What could possibly be gained from reopening that wound? But as she stared at the message, Elora realized there was a part of her that needed this too, not for reconciliation but for completion. She called Valerian, who listened without judgment as she processed her thoughts aloud. "I think I should talk to him," she concluded. "Not in person, but maybe a video call. To finally close that chapter properly. If that's what you need, I support you completely," Valerian replied. "Do you want me there with you?" His offer touched her deeply. "No," she said after a moment. "This is something I need to do alone, but knowing you're in my corner means everything." They arranged the call for that evening. As the appointed hour approached, Elora felt surprisingly calm. She sat at Callista's dining table, laptop open, a cup of tea cooling beside her. When Marius's face appeared on screen, she was struck by how different he looked. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a new heaviness to his features. "Elora," he said, his voice catching. "Thank you for agreeing to this." She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You said you wanted closure." Marius took a deep breath. "Yes, I've been in therapy since you left, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I risked everything that mattered for something so meaningless. And," Elora prompted, surprised by her own steadiness, "and I've learned I have deep issues with validation and self-worth. When things got challenging between us, when you were busy with your career and I felt neglected, I looked for affirmation elsewhere, instead of talking to you." He paused. "It's not an excuse, just an explanation." Elora absorbed his words. 6 months ago, they would have torn her apart. Now, they simply existed as information, separate from her worth and happiness. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally. "I hope the therapy helps you heal." Marius looked surprised by her response. "I thought you'd be angrier." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "I was, for a long time. But anger takes so much energy, Marius. Energy I'd rather put toward building something new than dwelling on what's broken." His eyes grew shiny with unshed tears. "I've lost you completely, haven't I?" "You lost me the moment you decided our vows were optional," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we both can't find happiness again, separately." "I hear you're seeing someone," Marius said, an edge to his voice. "The guy from that night on the street." Elora nodded, refusing to feel guilty. "I am. Does he make you happy?" The question seemed torn from him unwillingly. "Yes," she said simply. "But more importantly, I make myself happy now. I don't depend on someone else for my sense of worth anymore." That, she realized as she said it, was the most profound change of all. She had rebuilt herself, not around Valerian or in opposition to Marius, but on her own foundation. "I wish things had been different," Marius said finally. "I wish I'd been stronger, better." "I know," Elora replied gently. "For what it's worth, I forgive you, Marius, not for your sake, but for mine." Carrying that pain was exhausting. When the call ended, Elora sat quietly for a long time, letting the emotions settle. She texted Valerian, "It's done. I'm okay. Actually, I'm more than okay." His reply came immediately, "I'm proud of you. Want company tonight?" "Oh," she smiled at her phone. "Yes, please. Bring dinner." That night, curled up on Callista's couch with takeout containers spread, across the coffee table, Elora recounted the conversation to Valerian. "The strangest part," she concluded, "was realizing I truly don't love him anymore. Not just that I'm angry or hurt, but that those feelings have been replaced by nothing, just a kind of distant compassion." Valerian took her hand, running his thumb across her knuckles. "That's how you know you've truly healed, when there's no pain left, just learning." Over the following weeks, Elora turned her focus to rebuilding her life completely. She found a small apartment in the West Village, a sun-filled one, bedroom, with large windows perfect for her growing collection of houseplants. Valerian helped her move in, arranging furniture and hanging artwork. With the same attention to detail, he gave everything in his life. "It feels strange," she admitted as they collapsed onto her new couch after a day of unpacking. "Having a place that's just mine. No history, no ghosts." Valerian pulled her closer. "A blank canvas for whatever you want to create next." What she created next surprised even herself. Inspired by a job offer from a boutique architectural firm specializing in sustainable design, Elora found herself reconnecting with the creative passions she'd set aside during her marriage. She started sketching again, not just buildings and fountains, but abstract forms, emotions translated into line and shadow. Valerian noticed the growing stack of sketchbooks by her bed. "These are extraordinary," he said one morning, flipping through pages of her drawings. "You never told me you were an artist as well as an architect." Elora shrugged, embarrassed by his praise. "I used to draw all the time as a teenager, got away from it somehow." "Why did you stop?" he asked, studying a particularly expressive drawing of twisted tree roots emerging from concrete. She considered his question. Marius never really understood it. He called it my hobby. "Eventually, I just focused on the architecture, the practical application of creativity." "But you're reconnecting with it now," Valerian observed. "Reclaiming that part of yourself." "I am," she agreed, surprised by how important it felt. "It's like finding a piece of myself I'd forgotten was missing." As spring deepened into summer, Elora's transformation continued. She joined a women's rock climbing group that met twice weekly at a Brooklyn gym, something she'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. She reconnected with old friends from architecture school, people she'd drifted away from during her marriage. She visited her parents in Willow Creek, sharing her new life with them and receiving their blessing. Through it all, Valerian remained a steady, supportive presence. Unlike Marius, who had always subtly competed with her achievements, Valerian celebrated her successes as if they were his own. When her design for a community garden pavilion won a prestigious sustainability award, he surprised her with a framed copy of the announcement and a weekend trip to a botanical garden in Connecticut that had inspired her concept. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" she asked him as they wandered among exotic plants, her hand comfortably in his. He smiled. "I pay attention to what lights you up. It's not complicated. I just want to see you happy." The simplicity and sincerity of his answer moved her deeply. This, she realized, was what true partnership felt like, not possession or competition, but mutual growth and support. One warm July evening, as they prepared dinner together in her apartment, Elora found herself watching Valerian chop vegetables with the same focused attention he gave to everything. There was something so comforting about his presence in her space, the way he moved around, her kitchen as if he belonged there, the casual intimacy of their domestic rhythm. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words emerging with surprising ease. Valerian looked up, knife pausing mid-chop, his expression opening with wonder. They had been together for months now, but neither had spoken those words yet, both understanding the weight they carried. "I love you too," he replied, setting down the knife and moving toward her. "So much it scares me sometimes." She raised an eyebrow. "You scared? The man who runs a multi-million-dollar company and skydives for fun?" He laughed softly, pulling her into his arms. "Terrified. Because you matter more than all of it. Because loving someone this much means having something precious to lose." Elora understood his fear, because she shared it. Loving again after betrayal required a courage different from any other kind. The willingness to be vulnerable, knowing exactly how much it could hurt. "We could be scared together," she suggested, smiling against his chest. "Seems more efficient." His laughter rumbled through her, warm and real. "I've waited 10 years to love you, Elora Matthews. A little fear isn't going to stop me now." Later that week, Valerian invited Elora to join him for an important client dinner. She wore a sleek emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, feeling confident, in a way that came from within, rather than from external validation. The restaurant was exclusive and elegant, overlooking the East River. As they were led to their table, Elora noticed a familiar face at a nearby booth. Gregory, Maddox, her former boss from Maddox and Bell, dining with what appeared to be new clients. Valerian followed her gaze. "Should we say hello?" he asked quietly. Elora hesitated, then nodded. As they approached the table, she saw recognition dawn on Gregory's face, followed by surprise. "Elora, what a pleasant surprise." He stood, extending his hand. "You look wonderful." "Thank you, Gregory. It's good to see you too." She turned to introduce Valerian, but Gregory's eyes had already widened in recognition. "Valerian Hawke," he said, extending his hand with new interest. "I had no idea you two knew each other." "We're together, actually," Elora explained, feeling Valerian's hand settle supportively at the small of her back. Gregory looked between them with undisguised curiosity. "Well, that's unexpected and fortuitous. Valerian's company just outbid 3 others for our new visualization software contract." Valerian smiled diplomatically. "I hope my personal connection to Elora won't complicate matters." "Not at all," Gregory assured him, though his eyes remained calculating. He turned to Elora. "We've missed your talent at the firm. The Riverside Fountain just isn't the same without your vision." "I'm very happy at Clayton and Associates," Elora replied, referring to her new firm. "But I appreciate hearing that." As they returned to their own table, Elora felt a curious mix of emotions: vindication that her former employer recognized her value, satisfaction at her new position, and profound gratitude for how far she'd come. "You handled that gracefully," Valerian observed. 6 months ago, I would have been a nervous wreck," she admitted, "worried about what he thought of me, if he was judging my choices. And now," she smiled, shrugging elegantly, "now I know my worth doesn't depend on his opinion or anyone else's." That night, after returning to her apartment, they stood together on her small balcony the city lights creating a private galaxy around them. Valerian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Move in with me," he said softly. "Not because you need to, but because I want to wake up beside you every morning." Elora turned in his arms to face him. "You're sure?" "It's only been 7 months," he finished. "And 10 years of waiting before that." His eyes were serious, tender. "I'm not asking because I want to rush you. I'm asking because every day we're apart feels like a day wasted." Elora considered his words. She loved her new apartment, the independence it represented. But she loved this man more, loved the partnership they were building, the mutual respect and support that defined their relationship. "Yes," she said simply, "but I'm keeping some of my plants." His laughter filled the night air. "I would expect nothing less." As summer faded into autumn, Elora moved her belongings into Valerian's penthouse. Unlike her hurried, desperate departure from the apartment she'd shared with Marius, this transition felt measured and joyful, a step forward rather than an escape. They created spaces that were distinctly hers within their shared home, a small studio for her, drawing, shelves for her books, her grandmother's quilt draped across the back of the sofa. Valerian watched her nest with evident pleasure, adjusting his own habits to accommodate hers with willing grace. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The devastating betrayal that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. Painful but necessary, clearing the path for something truer and more authentic. "I never thought I'd say this," she murmured, "but in a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened with Marius." Valerian's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really?" She nodded. "If he hadn't betrayed me, I might never have found myself again. And I certainly wouldn't have found you." His arms tightened around her. "I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are meant to be, no matter what path we take." Elora smiled, turning to kiss him softly. "I used to think that was a romantic fantasy. Now I'm not so sure." Her transformation wasn't just about finding new love. It was about discovering her own strength, reclaiming her passions, and building a life that reflected her true self rather than someone else's expectations. The woman who had stumbled blindly out of her apartment that terrible day was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more whole. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted or know someone who has, share this story with a friend who needs to hear that their worth isn't defined by someone else's actions. Sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings, if we're brave enough to walk through that door. Golden morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting warm patterns across the bed where Elora lay awake, watching Valerian sleep. 1 year had passed since that devastating afternoon when she'd walked in on Marius and the other woman. 1 year of grief, growth, healing, and ultimately, unexpected joy. She slipped from beneath the covers and padded to the kitchen, brewing coffee in comfortable silence. From this height, Manhattan spread before her like a promise, the same city where she had experienced her greatest heartbreak, now the backdrop for her greatest happiness. As the coffee maker hummed, Elora touched the threshold pendant that still hung around her neck. She thought about doorways, about endings that become beginnings, about how sometimes we must lose everything to find what truly matters. Valerian appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes soft with love. "Good morning," he murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Good morning," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about everything that led me here." He kissed her temple. "Regrets? Not one," she said with certainty. "The pain was real, but so was the growth. I needed to break to become whole." That was the truth she'd discovered. Sometimes life shatters us so completely that we have no choice but to rebuild ourselves, piece by piece, stronger at the broken places. Her mother had been right that night in Willow Creek. She'd had strength inside her that even she hadn't recognized. The woman who'd stood frozen in her doorway a year ago, watching her marriage crumble, could never have imagined the life she'd built from those ruins. She couldn't have foreseen the hard-won confidence, the reclaimed passions, the love that respected rather than diminished her. Elora turned in Valerian's arms, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing my value when I'd forgotten it." "I just noticed what was always there," he replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in that tender gesture she'd come to cherish. 2 years later, the nursery glowed with soft morning light, pale curtains swaying in the gentle June breeze. Elora sat in the handcrafted rocking chair Valerian had commissioned from a Vermont woodworker, her long curls falling around her shoulders as she cradled their daughter, Rhea, named after her mother. The 6-month-old gazed up with curious dark eyes that reflected both parents, Elora's shape, Valerian's intensity. "There's my little architect," Elora whispered, tracing a finger along Rhea's plump cheek. "Building dreams in that beautiful mind of yours." From the second bassinet came a series of increasingly determined coos. Julian, named after Valerian's grandfather, was awake and making his presence known. Where Rhea was contemplative and watchful, Julian approached the world with impatient enthusiasm. Valerian appeared in the doorway, suit jacket abandoned, tie loosened, and sleeves rolled up. Despite running a multi-billion-dollar company, he never missed this morning ritual. His face softened at the sight before him, the family he'd waited a lifetime to find. "Board meeting ended early," he explained, moving to lift Julian, who immediately grabbed his father's finger with surprising strength. "I think our son has future contract negotiation skills." Elora laughed, the sound light and free. "And Rhea has been studying the ceiling molding again. I swear she's drafting plans already." Valerian settled into the matching rocker beside her. Julian nestled against his chest. For several minutes, they sat in peaceful silence, the four of them connected by something deeper than blood or vows, a family forged through pain, patience, and profound love. "Central Park is beautiful today," Valerian said eventually. "The cherry esplanade is in full bloom. What do you say to a family picnic?" Elora's eyes brightened. "That sounds perfect." The twins haven't experienced their first cherry blossom season yet. An hour later, they spread a blanket beneath a canopy of pink blossoms. Julian and Rhea lay on their backs, fascinated by the dance of sunlight through petals above them. Other families strolled by, smiling at the twins' matching outfits, soft blue that complemented their brown skin. "Remember our first date at the gallery?" Valerian asked, unpacking the lunch their housekeeper had prepared. "The Leon Mercer exhibition?" Elora nodded, adjusting Rhea's sun hat. "The painting of the woman at the threshold. Standing between ending and beginning, you said." "I never told you this," Valerian confessed, "but I bought that painting that night. It's in storage. I thought we might hang it in the twins' room when they're older, to remind them that every story has chapters, and sometimes the most difficult ones lead to the most beautiful." Tears pricked at Elora's eyes. "That's perfect," she whispered. A light breeze scattered cherry blossoms across their blanket. Julian reached for them, delighted by the sudden pink snow, while Rhea observed with solemn concentration. "They're so different," Elora marveled. Julian rushing toward every experience, Rhea analyzing it first. "Like their mother," Valerian said, his eyes warm with admiration. "Thoughtful, observant, seeing beauty in details others miss. And their father," she countered. "Determined, passionate, never giving up on what matters." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched an elderly couple walk hand in hand along the path. The woman pointed out a particular blossom to her partner, who listened, with the attentiveness that comes from decades of loving the same person. "That will be us," Valerian said softly, following her gaze. "Yes," Elora agreed with quiet certainty. "It will." Later that afternoon, as the twins napped in their stroller, Elora and Valerian walked along the reservoir, their hands intertwined. The Manhattan skyline created a familiar backdrop, the same city where Elora had once fled with a shattered heart, now cradled her greatest joys. "I had dinner with Callista last week," Elora said. "She mentioned seeing Marius at an industry event." "He's engaged again." Valerian studied her face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Elora considered the question. "I hope he's grown. I hope he's learned. Everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. She squeezed Valerian's hand, but mostly, I feel grateful. What seemed like the worst moment of my life was actually the first step toward finding you, toward becoming the person I was meant to be. They paused at a viewing point, looking out over the water. Julian stirred, blinking awake. His sister followed moments later, as if connected by some invisible thread. They're synchronized, Valerian chuckled, lifting Julian while Elora gathered Ria into her arms. Holding their children at the edge of the water, with the city stretching before them, Elora felt a profound sense of completion. Not because her family made her whole. She had reclaimed that wholeness herself, piece by piece, in the aftermath of betrayal, but because they multiplied the joy she'd found on her own. You know, she said thoughtfully, I used to think heartbreak was something to survive. Now I see it was something that helped me thrive. Valerian nodded, understanding in his eyes. Pain carves deeper channels in us. When healing comes, there's more space for joy to flow. That evening, after the twins were settled in their cribs, Elora stood on the penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below, a mirror image of the stars above. Valerian joined her, wrapping a light blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. Penny for your thoughts, he murmured, his arms encircling her waist. I was thinking about doorways, she said, touching the threshold pendant she still wore. About how sometimes we have to be forced through one door to find the one that was meant for us all along. She turned in his arms to face him. 2 years ago today, I walked in on Marius and that woman. I thought my life was ending. I couldn't imagine surviving that pain, let alone finding happiness again. Valerian's eyes softened with love. And now? Now I understand that falling apart was necessary. I had to shatter completely to rebuild myself stronger, to make room for a love that enhances rather than defines me. She touched his face gently. For you, for our children, for the woman I've become. He kissed her palm, eyes shining with emotion. You rebuilt yourself. I just had the privilege of watching you bloom. As moonlight bathed the city in silver, Elora reflected on her journey, from the devastating betrayal that had once defined her to this moment of profound peace. She had learned that true healing isn't about erasing the scars, but understanding the strength they represent. That true love doesn't complete you. It recognizes that you were already complete. It doesn't define your worth, but celebrates it. It doesn't demand proof, but offers trust freely given. Life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes it leads us through heartbreak and betrayal, through dark nights and uncertain mornings. But if we're brave enough to keep walking, to trust ourselves when others have failed us, we often discover that the most painful ending was merely the prologue to our greatest chapter. Dear friends, if Elora's journey has touched your heart today, please hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family. And in the comments, I'd love to hear about a time when you transformed pain into purpose, when you rebuilt after betrayal. Because your story matters too, and it might be exactly the light someone else needs to find their way forward. Until next time, this is Mr. Roman, reminding you that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths.